Have you ever wondered what it takes to keep a family together when the world tries to tear it apart? In today's story, a young woman faces a heart-wrenching choice. Marry a man she doesn't love to save her family, or risk losing everything she holds dear. But what she discovers along the way will warm your heart and remind you of the quiet power of honor and love. If you're ready for a journey of sacrifice, redemption, and a happiness that blooms in the most unexpected places, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that touch the soul. Let's dive in. I stood in the ancient church in downtown Boston, the cold of the marble floor seeping through my thin silk slippers, making my toes tremble. The air carried the faint scent of sandalwood, swirling around the flickering candlelight that cast a soft golden glow on the pews. It reminded me of winter evenings long ago, when Mama would light candles in our tiny kitchen back home, her voice humming a lullaby as she baked bread, the warmth of the oven wrapping us in a cocoon of safety. But there was no warmth here. Not today. Today, I, Clara Evans, 24 years old and untouched by love, was marrying a man I didn't know. A man whose very presence felt like a wall of ice I could never hope to melt. Nathaniel Reed stood before me, towering and unyielding, his sharp jaw set like stone, his gray eyes as deep and unreadable as a stormy sea. At 37, he was the kind of man who commanded a room without speaking a word. The CEO of Reed Enterprises, a name that echoed through Boston's elite circles like a whispered warning. I'd heard the stories. How he'd built an empire, with nothing but sheer will, how he never smiled, how he valued power above all else. And now, I was to be his wife. Not because he loved me, but because my father had borrowed a fortune from his company to pay for Mama's heart treatments, a debt he couldn't repay. Nathaniel had offered a deal. Marry him, and the debt would vanish. It was a transaction. Nothing more, and I was the collateral. The priest's voice droned on, his words a distant hum beneath the pounding of my heart. My wedding dress, a simple silk gown, clung to my skin, its weight heavier than I'd imagined, as though it were woven with the threads of my sacrifice. I glanced at Nathaniel, searching for a flicker of softness, but his gaze remained fixed, ahead, cold and unwavering. "I do," he said, his voice low and steady, as if he were signing a contract rather than pledging a lifetime. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, and repeated the words, though they tasted like ash on my tongue. I do. But I didn't. Not in my heart. My heart was still back in our little bakery in Boston, where the smell of cinnamon and yeast filled the air, where I'd dreamed of a life filled with laughter and love. Not this hollow bargain. The ceremony ended with a muted murmur of congratulations from the sparse crowd, Nathaniel's business associates, not a single friend or family member of mine. Papa couldn't bear to come, his guilt too heavy, and Mama was too frail to leave her bed. Thomas, my sweet younger brother, had stayed with her, likely holding her hand and telling her stories to keep her spirits up. I felt a pang in my chest, a longing for the days when our family was whole, before the hospital bills and the whispered arguments between Papa and Mama late at night. I clutched the small velvet box in my hand, a keepsake Mama had given me for the wedding, her voice trembling as she'd pressed it into my palm that morning. "For my Clara," she'd whispered, her eyes glistening with tears. "Wear it, and remember who you are." As we stepped out of the church, the winter air bit at my cheeks, and I paused on the stone steps. The city of Boston sprawling before me under a gray sky. Nathaniel walked ahead, his broad shoulders rigid in his tailored black suit, not sparing me a glance. I opened the velvet box, my fingers trembling, and found a folded piece of paper nestled inside, a letter in Mama's handwriting, the ink faded, the edges worn from years of being held. My breath caught as I unfolded it, the words written in her delicate, shaky script. "Clara, my darling, please keep the honor of our family, even if it means sacrifice. A chill ran through me, colder than the winter wind. What did she mean? What honor was there in a marriage built on debt? And what was she hiding even now when I needed her guidance most? I pressed the letter to my chest, the paper crinkling softly, as fragile as my own heart felt in that moment. I looked up at Nathaniel, already waiting by the sleek black car that would take us to his estate. His expression unreadable. The weight of duty pressed down on me, heavier than the marble floor of the church, heavier than the vows I'd just spoken. I was a stranger in my own life now, bound to a man who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. But as I slipped the letter back into the box, I made a silent promise to Mama, to Papa, to Thomas, and to myself. I would endure this, for them. I would keep our family's honor, whatever that meant, even if it broke me. The car door slammed shut behind me, the sound sharp in the quiet afternoon, and as we drove away from the church, I stared out the window, the city blurring past in shades of gray. I thought of Mama's lullaby, the way her voice had always soothed me, even in the darkest times. I clung to that memory like a lifeline, knowing it might be the only warmth I'd find in the days ahead. But deep down, beneath the fear and the uncertainty, a question lingered, as persistent as the scent of sandalwood that still clung to my senses. What secret was Mama keeping? And how would it change the path I'd just set upon? The drive to Nathaniel's estate felt like an eternity, the silence between us heavier than the gray clouds pressing against the Boston skyline. I sat rigid in the plush leather seat of his black car, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, the velvet box containing Mama's letter still nestled in my palm. Outside, snowflakes drifted down, each one a fleeting whisper of white against the darkening afternoon, and I couldn't help but think of the bakery, my bakery, where the smell of cinnamon rolls and fresh yeast would be filling the air right now. I'd built that little shop with my own hands. Every loaf of bread, and every pastry a testament to the dreams I'd once held so dear. But those dreams felt like a lifetime ago, buried beneath the weight of the vows I'd just spoken. Nathaniel's estate loomed into view, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of Boston, its stone walls rising like a fortress against the winter chill. The iron gates creaked open, and we drove up a winding path lined with bare trees, their branches clawing at the sky. Inside, the house was a labyrinth of grandeur, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the faint scent of sandalwood lingering in every corner, just as it had in the church. But there was no warmth here, only an oppressive stillness that made my chest tighten. A housekeeper, an older woman with a pinched face, led me to my room, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous halls. "Your quarters, Mrs. Reed," she said, curtly, before disappearing down the corridor. Mrs. Reed. The title felt like a shackle, cold and unyielding around my heart. I stepped into the room, my silk slippers whispering against the polished floor. It was vast, with a 4-poster bed, draped in cream linens, a fireplace that stood cold and unlit, and a window overlooking the snow-dusted grounds. I set the velvet box on the dresser and moved to the window, pressing my hand against the frosted glass. The snow fell in a quiet dance, and I felt a pang of longing for the bakery, for the days when I'd watch the snow from behind the counter, a mug of hot cocoa in my hands, Thomas's laughter ringing in the air as he helped me decorate cookies for the neighborhood kids. A sharp knock at the door jolted me from my thoughts. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, his broad frame filling the space, his gray eyes as unreadable as ever. He'd changed out of his wedding suit into a charcoal sweater and trousers, but the air of authority clung to him like a second skin. "You'll stay here," he said, his voice low and clipped, as if he were issuing a command to an employee rather than speaking to his wife. "And you'll do your duty." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. But inside, a storm raged. Duty. That word again, the same one Mama had written in her letter. But what did it mean to a man like Nathaniel, who looked at me as though I were nothing more than a line item in his ledger? He turned to leave, but I found my voice, small and trembling. "What do you expect from me?" I asked, clutching the edge of the dresser for support. He paused, his hand on the doorframe, and glanced back at me, his gaze piercing. "I expect you to be my wife in name," he said. "Nothing more." The door closed behind him with a soft thud, and I was alone again, the silence pressing in like a vice. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the cream linens cool against my skin, and felt the weight of my new reality settle over me. I was a bird in a gilded cage, my wings clipped by a bargain I hadn't chosen, desperate for a tether to the life I'd left behind. I opened the velvet box and reread Mama's letter, tracing her shaky handwriting with my fingertip. "Keep the honor of our family," she'd written, but the words only deepened the ache in my chest. What honor was there in this cold, transactional marriage? As I folded the letter, a memory tugged at me. A line Mama had written years ago in another note, one she'd tucked into my lunchbox when I was a girl. "Look in the old trunk," she'd said then, a playful hint about a birthday surprise. On a whim, I crossed the room to the trunk at the foot of the bed, its leather surface worn and faded, a remnant of the few belongings I'd brought with me. Inside, among my old shawls and a few faded photographs, I found it, a small silver ring, simple and unadorned, the one Mama used to wear when I was a child. I slipped it onto my finger, the metal cold against my skin, and a flood of memories washed over me. I saw Mama in our kitchen, her hands dusted with flour as she taught me to knead dough, her laughter soft as she said, "Clara, honor is the most precious thing we have. It's what holds a family together, even when the world tries to tear us apart." I closed my eyes, the ring a quiet comfort, and whispered to myself, "I'll find a way through this, Mama. For you." But as I looked around the cold, cavernous room, I couldn't shake the feeling of being a stranger in my own life. Nathaniel's words echoed in my mind, nothing more, and I wondered if this was all my life would ever be, a duty to fulfill, a role to play. Yet the ring on my finger, small and unassuming, felt like a promise, a flicker of hope in the darkness. Maybe, just maybe, there was a light waiting for me at the end of this shadowed path, if only I could find the courage to keep walking. The days at Nathaniel's estate stretched into a quiet, suffocating rhythm, each one blurring into the next, like the snow that continued to fall outside my window. I woke each morning to the same cold grandeur, the marble floors that chilled my bare feet, the sandalwood scent that lingered in every room, and the silence that seemed to seep into my bones. But there was one small solace in this gilded cage. Mama had come to live with us, her frail health making it impossible for her to stay alone in our old house. Nathaniel had arranged for her to have a room down the hall near mine, and though he'd said nothing about it, I was grateful for her presence. She was my anchor, the one piece of home I could hold on to in this unfamiliar world. That morning, I stood in the estate's vast kitchen, the only place in the house that felt even remotely alive. The scent of chamomile tea drifted up from the pot on the stove, its floral warmth wrapping around me like a gentle hug. I stirred the tea slowly, watching the steam rise, and for a moment, I was a child again, standing beside Mama in our tiny kitchen back in Boston. She'd taught me how to brew chamomile on a snowy afternoon just like this one, her hands steady despite the tremor that had already begun to creep into them. "Tea isn't just a drink, Clara," she'd said, her voice soft as the snow outside. "It's a way to give love, to share a moment of peace." I'd laughed then, too young to understand. But now, as I poured the tea into a porcelain cup, her words felt like a lifeline. I carried the cup to Mama's room, my slippers whispering against the polished floor. She was sitting up in bed, a quilt draped over her lap, her face pale but her eyes bright with the quiet strength that had always defined her. "Good morning, my darling," she said, her voice a fragile melody. I set the tea on her bedside table and sat beside her, brushing a stray lock of gray hair from her forehead. Her skin felt cool beneath my fingers, and I reached for a damp cloth, gently wiping the faint sheen of sweat from her brow. "I'll never give up on you, Mama," I whispered, my voice trembling with the weight of that promise. She smiled, her hand finding mine, her touch as comforting as the chamomile's scent. "You're my pride, Clara," she said, and I felt a lump rise in my throat, the love between us a tether I clung to in this cold, lonely place. But even Mama's presence couldn't erase the reality of my marriage. Nathaniel was a shadow in the house. His presence felt more than seen. He spent his days in his study, a glass-walled room at the end of the hall, where the bitter scent of coffee mingled with the sandalwood that seemed to permeate everything. I'd pass by on my way to Mama's room, catching glimpses of him through the glass, his sharp profile bent over papers, his gray eyes focused, unyielding. He rarely spoke to me, and when he did, his words were as cold as the marble beneath my feet. "Don't expect me to love you," he'd said once, early on, his voice a blade that cut deeper than I'd expected. I'd nodded, my heart sinking, but I couldn't help wondering. Was there nothing more to him than this icy exterior? That afternoon, I found myself in his study, a rare errand to deliver a message from the housekeeper about a dinner arrangement. The room was a stark contrast to the rest of the house, modern, with sleek glass walls and a desk that gleamed under the light of a single lamp. The air was thick with the scent of coffee, sharp and grounding, a reminder of the countless mornings I'd spent in my bakery, brewing a pot for my customers. Nathaniel wasn't there, but a stack of papers on his desk caught my eye, a letter peeking out from beneath a ledger. I hesitated, my fingers hovering, but curiosity got the better of me. I slid the letter free, my breath catching as I read the words written in Nathaniel's precise, angular handwriting. "For Mrs. Evans, arrange for Dr. Harrow, the best cardiologist in Boston." I stared at the letter, my heart pounding. Dr. Harrow was a name I'd heard Papa mention once, a specialist far beyond our means, the kind of doctor who could have given Mama a fighting chance if we'd ever had the money. Nathaniel had hired him, for Mama. But why? He'd never said a word about it, never hinted at this act of kindness. I looked up, my gaze drifting to the glass wall, and saw him in the hallway, speaking with the housekeeper. For the first time, I noticed something in his eyes, a flicker of warmth, a softness that vanished as quickly as it appeared when he turned away. I slipped the letter back into place, my mind racing. Why would he do this? Was it just another part of the bargain? A way to ensure I'd play my role as his wife? Or was there something more? Something he wasn't ready to show? I returned to Mama's room, the chamomile tea now cold on her bedside table. She was asleep, her breathing shallow but steady, and I sat beside her, the silver ring on my finger glinting in the dim light. I thought of Nathaniel's letter, of that fleeting warmth in his eyes, and a spark of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to this man than the cold facade he wore so well. Maybe there was a light in this darkness, if only I could find the courage to look for it. I squeezed Mama's hand gently, whispering to myself as much as to her, "I'll find a way, Mama. For both of us." The estate felt a little less cold that afternoon, the faint glow of hope from Nathaniel's quiet act of kindness still flickering in my chest. I was in the kitchen, kneading dough for a batch of cookies, the familiar rhythm of my hands against the flour-dusted counter, a small comfort in this unfamiliar life. The scent of vanilla and sugar filled the air, a reminder of simpler days at my bakery in Boston. I decided to bake for Thomas, my younger brother, who was coming to visit. A rare moment of joy I clung to like a lifeline. Mama was resting in her room, her breathing steadier thanks to the care of Dr. Harrow. And I felt a quiet gratitude toward Nathaniel, even if I didn't fully understand his motives. The kitchen door creaked open, and Thomas bounded in, his cheeks, flushed from the winter chill, a wide grin lighting up his face. At 19, he still had the boundless energy of a child, and his presence brought a warmth to the estate that nothing else could. "Clara!" he exclaimed, holding up a small paper bag. "I brought the lemon cookies you made for my birthday last year. They're a bit stale, but I couldn't bear to throw them out." I laughed, the sound soft but genuine, and pulled him into a hug, the scent of snow and wool clinging to his coat. "You kept them all this time?" I asked, my heart swelling. He nodded, his eyes bright. "They remind me of home, of you and Mama and Papa, all of us together." We sat at the kitchen table, the cookies spread out between us, and for a moment, it felt like we were back in our little house in Boston, the world outside fading away. Thomas told me stories of his days at the community college, his voice bubbling with excitement, and I listened, savoring the sound of his laughter. But the peace was shattered by a sharp knock at the front door, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. I froze, my hands still dusted with flour, a sense of dread curling in my stomach. Thomas looked at me, his brow furrowing. "Who's that?" he asked, but I had no answer. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, his expression darker than I'd ever seen it, his gray eyes stormy with something I couldn't name. Behind him stood a man I didn't recognize, tall, with slicked back, hair and a smirk that sent a chill down my spine. "Clara," Nathaniel said, his voice low and controlled. "This is Edward Langston. He has business to discuss." Edward stepped forward, his gaze raking over me with a cold calculation that made my skin crawl. "So you're the new Mrs. Reed," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "I wonder if you know the kind of man you've married." I glanced at Nathaniel, searching for an explanation, but his jaw was set, his hands clenched at his sides. Edward continued, his voice sharp as a blade. "I'm here to offer Nathaniel a choice. He hands over a controlling share of Reed Enterprises, or I go public with the truth about your father, a truth that will ruin your family's name." My heart stopped, the room tilting around me. "What truth?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Edward smirked, his eyes glinting with malice. "Your father was a thief, Clara. He stole from Reed Enterprises years ago, and I have the proof. Imagine what Boston society will think when they hear the Evans name dragged through the mud." I felt the blood drain from my face, my hands trembling, as I gripped the edge of the table. Papa. A thief? It couldn't be true. He'd always been a man of honor, working long hours to provide for us, even when the weight of Mama's illness threatened to break him. But Edward's words struck a nerve, a shadow of doubt creeping into my mind. I looked at Nathaniel, my voice shaking. "Is this true?" I asked, but he didn't answer. His gaze locked on Edward, a storm brewing in his eyes. "I won't let anyone hurt Clara's family," Nathaniel said finally, his voice a low growl that sent a shiver through me. He turned to Edward, his posture rigid. "You'll have your shares. I'll step down as CEO. But you'll leave the Evans family alone." Edward's smirk widened, a predator savoring his victory, and he nodded before turning to leave, his parting words a venomous whisper. "Pleasure doing business with you, Reed." The kitchen was silent in his wake, the air thick with tension. Thomas reached for my hand, his eyes wide with worry, but I couldn't look at him. My gaze was fixed on Nathaniel, my mind racing with questions. Why would he do this? Why would he give up everything, his position, his power, to protect my family? stepped closer to him, my voice trembling. "Why, Nathaniel?" I asked, searching his face for answers. He met my eyes, and, for a moment, I saw something raw and unguarded in his gray gaze, a flicker of pain, of resolve. But he said nothing, turning away to leave me standing in the kitchen, the scent of vanilla now tinged with the bitter taste of uncertainty. I returned to Mama's room, my heart heavy, and found her awake, her eyes soft with concern. I sat beside her, the silver ring on my finger glinting in the dim light, and told her everything. Edward's threat, Nathaniel's sacrifice, the storm of emotions I couldn't untangle. She listened quietly, her hand resting on mine, and when I finished, she spoke, her voice a gentle whisper. "Clara, my darling, what Nathaniel did, that's love, the quiet kind that doesn't need words." Her words settled over me like a warm blanket, and I felt a shift inside me, a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. Maybe Mama was right. Maybe there was more to Nathaniel than I'd allowed myself to see. The kitchen was quiet after Edward's departure, the scent of vanilla lingering in the air like a fading memory of the warmth Thomas had brought with him. But the peace I'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty that clung to me like a shadow. Nathaniel's sacrifice, giving up his position as CEO to protect my family, echoed in my mind, a selfless act I couldn't reconcile with the cold, unyielding man I'd thought him to be. Mama's words, "That's love, the quiet kind," had stirred something deep within me, a fragile hope I was afraid to nurture. I needed answers, not just from Nathaniel, but from the past that Edward's threat had unearthed. That evening, I brought a cup of chamomile tea to Mama's room, the porcelain warm against my palms, the floral scent a soft reminder of her lessons about love and care. The lamp on her bedside table cast a golden glow over her pale face, her gray hair fanned out on the pillow like a halo. She was awake, her eyes soft but heavy with something unspoken. And I knew she sensed the storm brewing inside me. I set the tea down and sat beside her, the quilt beneath me soft and worn, a piece of home in this unfamiliar place. "Mama," I said, my voice trembling, "I need to know the truth. What did Edward mean about Papa? He called him a thief, but that can't be true." Mama's hand found mine, her fingers cool and trembling, but her grip was firm, as if she were anchoring me to her. "Clara, my darling," she began, her voice a fragile whisper. "I've kept this from you for too long, hoping to spare you the pain. But you deserve to know." She paused, her breath shallow, and I felt a knot tighten in my chest. "Your father was no thief," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "He worked for Reed Enterprises years ago, under Edward Langston's supervision. Edward framed him, falsified records, made it look like your father had stolen money. It was Edward's way of covering his own crimes, but your father took the fall. That's why we lost everything, why we've struggled all these years." The words hit me like a tidal wave, my breath catching in my throat. Papa, a man who'd worked tirelessly to provide for us, who'd taught me to hold my head high even when the world seemed against us, had been betrayed. His honor stripped, away by a lie. I felt a surge of anger, hot and fierce, toward Edward, but also a deep sorrow for Papa, who'd carried this burden in silence. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking, tears spilling down my cheeks. Mama squeezed my hand, her touch a lifeline. "Because I wanted to protect you, Clara," she said. "But Nathaniel, he knows the truth. He found out years ago. And when your father came to him for help, he offered this marriage, not just to clear the debt, but to shield us from Edward's cruelty." My heart stopped, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with a clarity that left me reeling. Nathaniel hadn't married me out of cold calculation. Not entirely. He'd done it to protect my family, to restore the honor Edward had stolen from us. But why hadn't he told me? Why had he let me believe this was nothing more than a transaction? I stood, my hands trembling, and kissed Mama's forehead, the chamomile's scent mingling with the salt of my tears. "I need to talk to him," I whispered, and she nodded, her eyes full of understanding. I found Nathaniel in the library, a room I'd rarely entered, its walls lined with leather-bound books, the air thick with the scent of old paper and burning wood from the crackling fireplace. The firelight danced across his sharp features, casting shadows that softened the hard lines of his jaw. He stood by the hearth, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his gray eyes distant as he stared into the flames. He didn't look up as I entered, but I felt the weight of his presence, the quiet intensity that had always made me feel so small. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "About my father, about Edward. Why did you let me think this marriage was just a deal?" He turned to me then, his gaze locking with mine, and I saw something raw in his eyes, a vulnerability I'd never seen before. "Because I needed you, Clara," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, but every word carried the weight of a confession. "Not because of the debt, not because of Edward, but because I can't live without you." The glass in his hand trembled slightly, the amber liquid catching the firelight, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. His words hung between us, heavy and unguarded, a truth I hadn't been prepared to hear. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, and reached out, my fingers brushing against his hand. His skin was warm, a stark contrast to the cold I'd always associated with him, and the simple touch sent a shiver through me, as if a wall between us had cracked, letting in a sliver of light. I looked into his eyes, searching for the man behind the mask, and for the first time I saw him. Not the CEO, not the cold stranger I'd married, but a man who had sacrificed everything for me, for my family. "Nathaniel," I whispered, my voice barely audible, but I didn't need to say more. The warmth of his hand beneath mine, the firelight flickering around us, spoke louder than words ever could. Nathaniel's confession in the library lingered in my mind like the warmth of the fire that had flickered around us, a quiet flame I couldn't extinguish. "I can't live without you," he'd said, and those words had cracked something open inside me. A door I'd kept firmly shut since the day I'd walked down the aisle. For the first time, I saw him not as the cold, unyielding man I'd married, but as someone who might be just as lost as I was, searching for a connection he didn't know how to name. The touch of his hand, warm beneath mine, had felt like a promise, a fragile bridge between us that I was hesitant to cross, but couldn't ignore. The next morning, I woke with a renewed sense of purpose, the silver ring on my finger glinting in the pale light that filtered through my bedroom window. The snow outside had stopped, leaving the estate grounds blanketed in a pristine white, a fresh canvas that mirrored the hope stirring in my heart. I decided to bake again, to fill the kitchen with the sense of my childhood, a small act of defiance against the cold formality of this place. But this time, I wouldn't do it alone. I wanted Nathaniel to be part of it, to see if the man I'd glimpsed in the library could step out of the shadows and into the light of something real. I found Thomas in the dining room, his nose buried in a book, his boyish grin lighting up when he saw me. "Clara, are we baking again?" he asked, his voice bright with excitement. I nodded, my heart lifting at the thought of sharing this moment with him. "But we're going to need help," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Go find Nathaniel. Tell him I need him in the kitchen." Thomas raised an eyebrow, curiosity sparking in his eyes, but he didn't question me, scampering off, to deliver the message with the energy only a 19-year-old could muster. The kitchen was already warm when I began, the oven humming softly as I gathered ingredients: flour, sugar, butter, and a vial of vanilla that filled the air with its sweet, comforting scent. I was rolling out dough when Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, his gray eyes cautious, his charcoal sweater a stark contrast to the flour-dusted counter. "You needed me?" he asked, his voice low, a trace of uncertainty in his tone. I nodded, gesturing to the dough. "We're making cookies," I said simply. "Thomas and I could use an extra pair of hands." He hesitated, his gaze flickering to Thomas, who was already shaping dough into lopsided stars, his laughter echoing in the room. To my surprise, Nathaniel stepped forward, rolling up his sleeves with a quiet determination that made my heart skip. We worked side by side, the rhythm of baking a familiar dance I'd once shared with Mama and Thomas. But now, with Nathaniel here, it felt different. New, yet somehow right. Thomas, ever the mischief maker, flicked a bit of flour at Nathaniel, the white powder dusting his sweater. I braced for a reprimand, but instead, Nathaniel froze, then let out a soft, unexpected chuckle, a sound so warm, so genuine, that it stopped me in my tracks. He smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and said, "You bake well, Clara." My cheeks flushed, a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the oven. "Thank you," I replied, my voice soft, a shy smile of my own mirroring his. The cookies baked, their golden edges filling the kitchen with the scent of vanilla and sugar, and we sat at the table, a plate of them between us, Thomas munching, happily as he told stories of his college escapades. But my attention was on Nathaniel, the way he listened to Thomas with a quiet attentiveness, the way his smile lingered, softer now, as if he'd found a moment of peace in this simple act. I felt a pull toward him, a longing to know the man beneath the surface, the one who'd sacrificed so much for my family without ever asking for recognition. Later that evening, after Thomas had gone to bed, I found Nathaniel in the sitting room, the fire in the hearth casting a warm glow over his sharp features. The air smelled of burning wood, and the faint trace of vanilla that still clung to us both. He sat in an armchair, a book in his lap, but his eyes were distant, lost in thought. I sat across from him, the silver ring on my finger a quiet reminder of Mama's lessons about honor and love. "Nathaniel," I said softly, my voice breaking the silence, "why did you do it? Why give up everything for my family?" He looked at me, his gray eyes searching mine, and set the book aside. "I never knew love, Clara," he said, his voice low, each word heavy with a vulnerability that made my chest ache. "My father was a cold man, obsessed with power. My mother left when I was a boy, and I learned to build walls to survive. I didn't know how to let anyone in." He paused, his gaze dropping to the fire, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "But then I met you, and I couldn't help it. I wanted to protect you, to give you what I never had." His words settled over me, a quiet truth that bridged the distance between us. I stood, crossing the small space to kneel before him, my hand reaching for his. His fingers were warm, steady, and I squeezed them gently, my heart swelling with a tenderness I hadn't expected to feel. "We'll learn together," I whispered, my voice firm despite the tears prickling at my eyes. "We'll learn to love, Nathaniel." He looked at me, his gray eyes softening, and for the first time, I felt the walls between us begin to crumble, the firelight bearing witness to a moment of trust that felt like the beginning of something new. The warmth of that evening in the sitting room lingered like the scent of vanilla on my skin, a quiet promise of something new between Nathaniel and me. His confession about his lonely childhood, the walls he'd built to survive, had shifted my view of him, painting him not as a cold stranger, but as a man who'd never been given the chance to love. Until now, I'd promised we'd learn together, and in the days that followed, I felt the distance between us shrink, each shared glance, each tentative smile, a step closer to understanding. But the shadow of Edward Langston still loomed over us, a storm waiting to break. And I knew our fragile peace couldn't last. It was late in the afternoon when the storm arrived, in the form of a letter delivered to the estate, its crisp envelope bearing Edward's name in sharp, angular script. I found Nathaniel in his study, the glass walls reflecting the fading light of the winter sun, the air heavy with the bitter scent of coffee. He stood by the window, the letter in his hand, his jaw tight, his gray eyes stormy with a fury I'd never seen before. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. He turned to me, his expression unreadable, but the tension in his frame spoke volumes. "Edward," he said, his voice low and controlled, "is making his final move." He handed me the letter, and I felt the paper tremble in my hands as I read the words. Edward demanded more. He wasn't satisfied with Nathaniel stepping down as CEO. He wanted full control of Reed Enterprises, threatening to release falsified documents that would not only ruin my father's name, but also destroy Nathaniel's reputation, painting him as complicit in the supposed theft years ago. "If I don't comply by tomorrow," Nathaniel said, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of anger, "he'll make sure the Evans name and mine are dragged through the mud. He wants to destroy us both." I felt the air leave my lungs, the weight of Edward's cruelty pressing down on me. Papa had already suffered so much, his honor stolen by a lie, his health broken by years of stress. And now, Edward wanted to take what little we had left, to shatter the fragile hope I'd found with Nathaniel. I looked at him, my heart pounding, and saw the resolve in his eyes, a determination that both comforted and terrified me. "What will you do?" I asked, my voice trembling. He stepped closer, his gaze locking with mine, and said, "I'll give him everything, every last share, every piece of the empire I built. I'll walk away from it all to protect your family, Clara." The words hit me like a wave, a mix of gratitude and disbelief washing over me. Nathaniel was willing to sacrifice everything, the power, the legacy he'd spent his life building, for me, for my family. I reached for his hand, my fingers brushing against his, the warmth of his skin grounding me in the midst of my turmoil. "You don't have to do this," I whispered, tears prickling at my eyes. "We can fight him together." But he shook his head, his gray eyes softening as he looked at me. "I've fought enough battles, Clara," he said, his voice low. "This one I'll win by letting go, for you." The rest of the day passed in a blur, Nathaniel finalizing the paperwork to transfer his shares, his every movement deliberate, as if he were laying down the last pieces of a life he'd once known. I watched him from a distance, my heart aching with the weight of his sacrifice, and felt a resolve of my own take root. I wouldn't let him face this alone. As the sun began to set, casting a fiery glow over the snow-covered grounds, I found him in the garden, the air crisp and cold, the sky streaked with hues of red and gold. He stood by a bare oak tree, his breath visible in the chill, his broad shoulders hunched as if the weight of the world rested on them. I walked to him, my boots crunching softly in the snow, and without a word, I wrapped my arms around him, pressing myself against his chest. I felt the steady beat of his heart through the soft wool of his sweater, a rhythm that anchored me in the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "Thank you, Nathaniel," I whispered, my voice thick with tears. He stiffened for a moment, then relaxed, his arms encircling me, his warmth seeping into me like the last rays of the setting sun. "I belong to you, Clara," he murmured, his voice a quiet vow, and I felt my heart swell, the cracks in my walls mending with every word. We stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the sunset painting the world in shades of gold, a moment of peace amidst the chaos Edward had brought. But that peace was interrupted by the sound of footsteps, and I turned to see Thomas approaching, his face bright with a grin, a small paper bag in his hand. "Clara! Nathaniel!" he called, holding up the bag. "I brought the cookies we made last time. We're still a family, right?" His words, so simple, so pure, brought a smile to my lips, and I felt a tear slip down my cheek, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming love I felt for the people around me. Nathaniel squeezed my hand, his gray eyes warm with a tenderness I'd never seen before. And I knew, in that moment, that we'd weathered the worst of the storm. Edward might have taken Nathaniel's empire, but he couldn't take this. The bond we were building, the family we were becoming. As the last light of the sun dipped below the horizon, I leaned into Nathaniel, Thomas's laughter echoing around us, and felt the strength of our shared honor holding us together, a foundation that no one could break. The storm Edward Langston had brought into our lives had passed, leaving behind a quiet that felt like the first breath after a long, suffocating night. Nathaniel had given up everything, his position, his empire, to protect my family, and in doing so he'd shown me a depth of love I'd never thought possible from the man I'd once seen as cold and unyielding. The days that followed were a slow unfolding, each one a step closer to something new, something real. The estate, once a gilded cage, began to feel like a home, its marble halls softened by the laughter of Thomas, the gentle presence of Mama, and the steady warmth of Nathaniel at my side. That afternoon, I stood in the kitchen, the golden light of a late winter sunset streaming through the windows, casting long shadows across the counter. The air was rich with the scent of coffee, a dark, grounding aroma that mingled with the warmth of the fireplace in the sitting room nearby. I poured 2 cups, the porcelain warm against my palms, and carried them to the sitting room, where Mama, Thomas, and Nathaniel were gathered. Mama sat in an armchair, a quilt draped over her lap, her face brighter than I'd seen in months. Dr. Harrow's care had worked wonders. Her breathing was steadier, her color returning, and the smile on her lips was a quiet miracle I'd feared I'd never see again. Thomas sat cross-legged on the rug, a plate of cookies in front of him, his laughter filling the room as he recounted a story from our childhood. "Remember when we tried to bake bread with Mama, Clara?" he said, his eyes sparkling. "We used salt instead of sugar, and Papa pretended it was the best thing he'd ever tasted." I laughed, the memory washing over me like a warm wave. The scent of flour in the air, Mama's gentle scolding, Papa's kind eyes crinkling at the corners. I set the coffee cups on the table and sat beside Nathaniel on the sofa, the soft wool of his sweater brushing against my arm, a quiet comfort that felt as natural as breathing. Mama reached for my hand, her fingers warm and steady, a stark contrast to the frail tremble I'd grown used to. "Clara," she said, her voice soft but firm, "you've kept the honor of our family. I'm so proud of you." Her words settled over me like a benediction, and I felt tears prick at my eyes, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming love that filled the room. I squeezed her hand, the silver ring on my finger glinting in the firelight, a silent reminder of the lessons she'd taught me, about honor, about love, about holding a family together even when the world tried to tear it apart. Nathaniel's hand found mine, his touch gentle but sure, and I turned to him, meeting his gray eyes. They were softer now, the storm that had once lived in them replaced by a quiet warmth that made my heart ache in the best way. "We'll take care of her, together, Clara," he said, his voice low, a promise that carried the weight of everything we'd been through. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion, and leaned into him, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat a reminder that we'd found each other, against all odds. Thomas looked up from his cookies, his grin wide and unshadowed by the hardships we'd faced. "We're a family, right?" he asked, his voice full of the innocent certainty only a younger brother could have. I smiled through my tears, nodding. "Yes, Thomas," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion swelling inside me. "We're a family." The words felt like a vow, one I'd keep for the rest of my life, a testament to the honor Mama had spoken of, the honor that had held us together through the darkest of times. As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the room in a soft golden glow, I slipped away to my bedroom, a small task lingering in my mind. I sat at the desk by the window, the cool wood smooth beneath my fingers, and pulled out a sheet of paper and a pen. The silver ring on my finger caught the last light of the day as I wrote, the words flowing from me like a prayer. "Clara," I began, my handwriting steady, "you've found happiness, the kind that comes late but lasts forever, through honor and love." I folded the letter and tucked it into the velvet box where Mama's note still rested, a keepsake for the woman I'd become, a reminder of the journey that had brought me here. That night, I lay in Nathaniel's arms, the estate silent around us. The only sound the steady rhythm of his breathing as it mingled with mine. His warmth enveloped me, the soft wool of his sweater a comforting weight against my skin. And I felt a peace I'd never known before. We'd faced the storm together. Edward's threats, the secrets of the past, the walls we'd both built around our hearts. And we'd come through it stronger, bound by a love that had grown quietly, steadily, in the spaces between our sacrifices. As I drifted toward sleep, Nathaniel's voice broke the silence, a soft whisper against my hair. "You're my everything, Clara," he said, and I smiled, my heart full. I thought of Mama's smile, Thomas's laughter, the letter I'd written to myself, and knew that we'd found something rare. A family forged not just by blood, but by honor, by love, by the quiet moments that held us together. And in Nathaniel's arms, I knew we'd carry that love forward, a dawn of reunion that would last a lifetime. If this story has touched your heart, please leave a comment sharing your own story of love and family and subscribe for more heartfelt tales like this one.